Hey there, welcome to this explainer. It's pretty wild to think about, but the very device you're watching this on right now is a direct product of what is easily the most transformative era in human history. We're exploring the 20th and 21st centuries today, a period totally defined by a story of unprecedented, rapid connection and the incredibly complex consequences that followed. If you're someone who loves structured, clear learning, you are absolutely in the right place, because we're going to unpack exactly how the modern world was built. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap. We're basically breaking down a massive century of history into 5 digestible pillars: the technological revolution, economics in a global age, a shared global culture, environmental and health costs, and finally, resistance in global governance.
So let's start with pillar number 1, the technological revolution and shrinking the globe.
I want you to imagine for a second just how massive and disconnected the world felt right before the year 1900. And then, boom. Suddenly, early radio, cellular networks, and eventually the internet allowed communities to form instantaneously across borders. Meanwhile, we get the humble shipping container, which seriously was a total game changer. It revolutionized transportation, drastically slashing the cost of moving goods, and practically erased geographic distance. And powering this whole shebang were entirely new energy technologies, specifically petroleum and nuclear power, which sent industrial productivity just skyrocketing. Now, what's really fascinating here is this intense global population density. This is an entirely new phenomenon for humanity. It was largely sustained by the Green Revolution, which spread chemically and genetically modified agriculture across the globe to feed billions. You couple that with incredible medical innovations like safe vaccines and antibiotics, and suddenly humans were able to survive longer and multiply faster than ever before. But, technology didn't just alter the landscape on some huge macro level. It fundamentally transformed human lives on a deeply personal level, too. In a really fascinating twist, while those medical advances were extending our lifespans, new birth control technologies gave women unprecedented autonomy over their own bodies and careers. And that actually contributed to declining fertility rates in much of the world. All right, moving right along to Pillar 2, economics in a global age and the emergence of the free market web. As physical distance shrank, labor completely reorganized itself. Think about modern products for a second. A smartphone designed in a so-called knowledge economy like the US or Japan is now most likely manufactured in industrial hubs across Vietnam or Mexico. And this shift really accelerated post-Cold War as a very diverse group of leaders, from Ronald Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in Britain, to Deng Xiaoping in China and Augusto Pinochet in Chile, pushed for aggressive free market liberalization. Now, to make this gigantic, decentralized global factory actually work, the world needed entirely new infrastructure. Enter the multinational corporations. Companies like Nestle, Nissan, and Mahindra became these stateless giants, operating seamlessly across borders. And they were heavily supported by regional trade agreements like NAFTA and ASEAN, and overseen by international referees like the World Trade Organization. These groups basically acted as the vital pipelines that allowed free market principles to just spread globally. Let's move to Pillar 3 and see how this all builds into a shared global culture and the blending of borders. Because, let's face it, when economies link up, cultures are inevitably going to collide. Western exports and global brands became absolutely ubiquitous. I mean, Coca-Cola, Toyota, or platforms like Facebook and Alibaba, they are everywhere. Massive global events like the World Cup and the Olympics drew the entire world's attention together at the exact same time. But for me, the true magic of this era is the emergence of cultural hybrids. We're talking about things like Bollywood, fusing American cinematic flair with Indian traditions, or reggae, mixing African musical styles with indigenous Jamaican music. Just brilliant. Okay, we do need to take a second to pause here, because we really have to ask a guiding question. What happens when a global economy and population just kicks into absolute overdrive? It's a double-edged sword. We have to contrast our triumphs, like our increased longevity, this amazing interconnectedness, and rising global literacy, with the looming edge of peril. We are facing severe environmental damage, deep, deep global inequality, and the rapid spread of entirely new threats. Which brings us to Pillar 4, environmental and health cost, the toll of progress. So, the crucial point to look at is right here. For centuries, human carbon emissions were, virtually flat. But right in parallel with that technological and industrial explosion we just talked about, they shoot straight up in this dramatic hockey stick curve.
The massive release of these greenhouse gases and pollutants into the atmosphere is the direct driver behind the ongoing global debates we're having today about the nature and causes of climate change.
And honestly, the damage extends way beyond just the atmosphere. We are actively seeing widespread deforestation, deserts that are literally expanding, a really sharp decline in air quality, and the rapid depletion and pollution of the world's fresh water supply. Today, human populations aren't just growing, we are intensely competing for a shrinking pool of resources. And then there's our health, which presents this really tragic paradox. On one hand, because we're living longer, we face diseases of longevity, like heart disease and Alzheimer's. Yet, at the exact same time, diseases tied to poverty, like malaria, tuberculosis, and cholera, they stubbornly persist. And worse, our hyper-connected transport networks mean an emergent threat like Ebola or influenza can cross the globe in a matter of hours, not months, leading to severe social disruption. And that leads us into our fifth and final pillar, resistance and global governance. Pushing back. Because everyday people definitely didn't just sit back and passively accept these new costs. Increased access to education really empowered marginalized groups to challenge the status quo. We saw global feminism rise right alongside female literacy, massive civil rights milestones, completely dismantling systems like apartheid, and the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights seeking to protect the vulnerable. And armed with better education, we saw the birth of modern environmental movements. Groups like Greenpeace and Professor Wangari Maathai's Green Belt movement in Kenya, actively protesting environmental exploitation. This pushback also heavily targeted economic and cultural homogenization. You had activists organizing and protesting against the policies of the IMF and the World Bank. And culturally, a lot of nations actively pushed back against the massive flood of Western media. For instance, the rapid growth of locally developed platforms like Weibo in China served as deliberate, homegrown alternatives to the global tech giants. And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate institutional response to this incredibly chaotic, hyper-connected world, the United Nations. Formed specifically to act as a universally recognized mediating authority, its monumental task is to try and manage international interconnection, facilitate cooperation, and prevent global conflict. Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought. We've traced how technology basically eradicated distance, how our economies and cultures became completely intertwined, and the really heavy environmental and social toll all of this has taken. As our world continues to shrink and our connections grow even tighter, how will we balance the incredible, life-saving benefits of globalization with its undeniable costs? Honestly, it is literally the defining question of our time. Thanks so much for exploring this explainer with me. Keep asking those big questions and keep learning.